podcast live from Dessau is broadcast from Mitteldeutschland and features all things languages. The show is hosted by our teachers, presenting students and guests from all walks of language learning experiences. Today we welcome Muhammad Ali, not the boxer. He's an architect, an artist, an English teacher, and our logo designer. Ali speaks English with an American accent, and he's never stepped foot in North America. Let's find out how this happened. Welcome to the In Lingua podcast, live from Dessau, Ali.
Thank you for having me, Scott. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for being here. Tell us, Ali, is English your mother tongue?
Actually, no, it's not. Yeah.
How is that possible? You don't have an accent.
It's a bit of a long story, but if you would allow me to tell it, I should try and compact it.
Of course.
Okay, so starting out my school life, I was not in Pakistan. I was actually in Saudi Arabia, in Sharjah, to be exact. Mm-hmm. And of course, I, because of my father, who was in the Air Force and was stationed there, I ended up joining an international school.
Okay.
Yeah. So English was the main language. And my home tutor was British. And that's kind of where I started out with, as in everything was English in the very beginning for me.
What were some of the students in the classroom? Like, where were they from?
Oh my God, there were like so many different people from so many different places. Like, I remember still one guy from America, awesome kid. There were a bunch of Chinese students there as well, and of course like 2 or 3 from Pakistan. Some were Indian. I think I would say one was Japanese. So that was it was a really nice place to be.
So this is during your elementary school years?
Yeah.
So the entire curriculum is in English?
Yes.
All classes?
Absolutely.
And you had an Arabic course?
Yes, we had one subject.
As a language course?
Yes,
basically.
Exactly.
So when you went home from school, what language did you speak in the house?
Of course, I spoke Urdu. That's the national language of Pakistan. Okay. And my parents themselves, they speak Punjabi. That's actually my mother tongue.
Okay.
But with me, they always spoke Urdu. Though my home tutor, she always told me, if you go back home, you're gonna speak English. No speaking any of other languages. So that was her way of telling me, yeah, you need to practice more.
Did your parents speak English?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. How many years did you study in Saudi Arabia?
I was there for 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you went back to?
Pakistan.
And how old are you at this time?
I was around 12, around 12, 13 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you go back to school in Pakistan?
Yeah.
Is the curriculum in English?
Yes. Because again, my father was in the Air Force, so I ended up in what would you call that? The federal board.
Okay.
That is in English. Everything is in English. Otherwise, you have like different other kinds of boards in Pakistan, which start with English in like the 5th class or the 6th class, something like that.
Is that a public school or a private school?
Yeah, public.
Okay, so it's a good public school.
Yes. Yeah.
In addition to schoolwork, how did you increase your proficiency in English?
I mean, I was learning English all the time, so I started to adapt entertainment as well in English. I mean, I would listen to English music, I would watch English shows, English cartoons as a kid. That kind of became a routine for me.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that might be very interesting for some of our listeners. Like, how helpful do you think YouTube, or maybe I shouldn't specifically say YouTube, but like
entertainment would be
internet sources or video sources, or how helpful are those, do you think, in general for increasing like language proficiency? Is it just more like expressions or phrases or vocabulary, or like I know people in Turkey that they've told me they learned how to speak English by watching Friends. I don't know if I believe that or not, but what do you like, what
I
did you watch? What were some of your
I totally believe that because I mean I am an example of that. Growing up as a kid, I loved watching like British sitcoms, like the comedy ones. One good example of that would be Mind Your Language.
Okay.
Absolutely loved that show. Still awesome. And another one was Faulty Towers. I mean, like I said, my tutor was a British citizen, so she pretty much I was able to understand what she was saying as I was learning from her, and that is why I was able to pick these shows up quickly.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about like when you started to seriously think about becoming an artist.
Going back, I guess when I was, again, in Pakistan, when I started schooling and everything, one thing which my teachers really appreciated was that, hey, your drawing's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, so you should actually go somewhere with this. So from the very start, I was like, okay, I guess that's kind of where I saw myself. Well, when I enrolled in this, art college, it was, I started out hoping I would become a graphic architect, a graphics designer.
Okay.
At least that was my goal, a graphics designer. And the first year was great. Everything was good. Of course, people liked my work and everything. But eventually, my father decided that no, graphics design isn't really a market he saw any future in because it was still an emerging market.
Okay.
And so he was like, no, architecture is the best thing for you. Go with architecture. I know a bunch of friends who are doing this and it's great. And I wasn't exactly a fan of it. I found it a bit boring, to be honest.
Okay.
But yeah, father's wishes, so I pretty much went there. But I can say, yeah, it didn't end up bad for me in any way.
No, I think at this point, we should point out to our listeners that you are the only child.
Yes.
So there are certain responsibilities that you may or may not feel towards your parents' wishes.
Yes, that's very true.
And I think that's universal.
I absolutely agree with it. Yeah. I mean, of course, I have my whole life I've depended on them, and that's the least I can do for them. So
what did you do after you graduated?
I pretty much looked for some kind of work.
Okay.
I was trying to get into an architectural office. I had a few contacts with some of my college professors, and they were pretty helpful with that, of course. So I learned a lot from them, working with them. I did end up finding like a job eventually.
Where was that?
Design was the name of the architectural studio.
Okay.
And yeah, it was pretty good. It was one of my father's friends, actually, who
networking is important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I learned a lot. I could say this, what I learned from my college, I had to relearn everything.
Okay.
Yeah, when you get into the real workforce or when you start working in real life,
right,
things aren't the way they seem.
The theory is different.
Everything is different, I would say.
How many years did you work for design?
I worked almost 2 years there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what, just give us a brief description of one of your projects.
Back when I was working there at design, I was doing mostly houses, like interior design for houses, coming up with paints and stuff like that.
Okay.
Furniture layouts, other kind of stuff like that. I mean, back then, that's where I kind of started to get into this interior designing stuff that I eventually made my niche.
Okay.
Yeah. I learned a lot about color theory back there from the office, of course, and yeah, it was pretty interesting, as in what color to choose, where, what is the impact of that color on our psyche and stuff like that. It was interesting.
So in a Pakistani house, like what colors are important in the design of the house, the interior? Let's say the family room.
Yeah, the family room. Okay. Or we could also call it the living room.
Okay, the living room, yeah.
Yeah, because in Pakistan, things are a bit different from, let's say, European houses.
Okay.
As in, you have like, I wouldn't say like a public area, but more like, you have a guest area, guest zone. So that is your drawing room, dining room, and guest room.
Okay.
And then you have your family or living room, where you don't really have any other individuals.
Just family.
Just family.
Okay.
So the colors you would choose for that area are mostly earthy colors.
Okay.
Yeah, to keep things lively, I would say.
Okay.
So you're looking at beige, you're looking at plays of reds, a little bit of red somewhere, and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, green is my favorite color. Greens as well, right?
Green is a good color, and if I were to recommend something, I would say green is best when it comes to study rooms.
So let's jump forward to Germany.
Yeah.
Given your language background and having a degree of fluency that's almost native like, does that give you the confidence to travel the world, to see the world?
Yes, that is actually a pretty good question. I mean, I always wanted to know the culture and the architecture and the history outside, because, you are sitting in one country and you have all of these windows, but you can only look through those windows. And what I mean is movies, documentaries, shows, stuff like that, music even. So my idea was to, actually go to these places that I always hear about, I watch and all of this stuff, and be there, experience things. And of course, we always hear about Germany and architecture, because that's what we learned. The Bauhaus is pretty famous all around the world.
Okay.
Yeah, especially when it comes to international architecture.
So when did you first hear about the Bauhaus?
At my college, when I started my architectural endeavors. Germany seemed like a good place because, of course, the historical significance, because there's architecture everywhere here. And I mean, looking at it, I still see the same structure or the same buildings which are being constructed today in Pakistan.
Sure.
And we're looking at 100-year-old building here.
Right.
So that is something quite interesting to me. Plus, of course, you have art everywhere. I mean, there's architecture, there's Gothic architecture, which is one of my personal favorites. And yeah, I just love to be around this place. And related to this, I thought English would be pretty much A-okay here, no problems. It was a bit surprising when I got here.
Okay.
Because at the airport, I still remember, everything was fine and dandy. I was speaking English. I was asking for directions. I was getting answers. Perfect. Everything's great. And the moment I stepped out and I got to the train station there, I was, of course, a bit confused because it's the first time I'm here, and everything is in German. And I asked a guy there, and of course I didn't get an answer. And all he said was "I'm sorry, I can't speak English." And I'm like, oh, okay, that's a bit troubling. But yeah, eventually I learned, not everybody speaks English here.
So tell us a little bit about your learning experience in learning German.
Well, I can say this, it wasn't easy.
Okay.
Because when I started my master's here, we had a German course, but again, it was just once a week, and it was like 2 hours. Uh, the teachers were great, of course.
Okay.
They tried their best, but such limited time was not enough.
2 hours a week.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not a lot of time.
That's not a lot of time. And the other thing is that everybody else in the campus spoke English. All the teachers, all the students were all speaking English, as well as the course itself was in English. So it was like we really didn't have much opportunity to hear or speak German. And of course, students being lazy that they are, we never bothered.
Do you think incentive is important here? Like, do you need to have an incentive to learn a second language?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You need to have a reason, as in, I wouldn't say like, oh, you have to be forced into it, but you definitely have to have an incentive to go and pursue a language.
And maybe the incentive came later when you graduated from the program.
Yes.
Okay.
Because then I realized that it's kind of hard to find a job in Germany without German. Always want to learn more. That's the goal. Always improve. I mean, I can't really say I might be able to do it, but want to be able to speak German like almost native level, the way I speak English. That's my goal.
Tell us about your inspiration for the In Lingua podcast logo.
Well, Scott, when we started the process of designing a logo, I mean, we were all discussing it together, and we were coming up with concepts and this and that, stuff like that. The discussion we had was to come up with a podcast which is a bit new, a bit different, a bit edgy, I guess, but something fun. So that gave me the idea, like, okay, we need to add this idea of mic drop, like saying something and just, stopping everybody else from saying anything. So that was one idea.
Okay.
And that is why in the logo you see the mic has been dropped. And it's on the podcast.
So we have the last word, right?
Exactly.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to come up with that drawing?
It took a few tries. I mean,
Do you sketch it out first by hand?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I always do that first. I mean, always playing with the pencil and paper and just coming up with ideas, drawing here and there, just seeing what works, what sticks. The Lingua logo was, of course, the inspiration to go with.
Okay.
That's when we started out the first design. But of course, it was not there. I didn't like it. I did try more playing it. Like I played more with it, but I wasn't happy. And then, like I said, this idea came up. Like, hey, what about like mic drop? Because that's kind of where we're going with this.
That's true.
So yeah, I pretty much was like, okay, let's use the Lingua logo. Let's turn it into a mic head and pretty much go from there. Connect it to the podcast.
And how will our listeners, be able to see that logo? Where can they find it?
I haven't posted it anywhere yet, but I guess if they want to.
It'll be attached to our podcast, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
It's going to be on the In Lingua page. It's going to be on our podcast. And need be, it's going to be on my Facebook page.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Last question. If people want to contact you or people want to look you up, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I have a Facebook. It's going to be hard to find me.
Okay.
Because there's way too many Muhamed Alis on Facebook. But there might not be as many Muhamed Alis in Dessau.
Okay.
So you can shorten your search there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dessau or Bauhaus, maybe?
Or Bauhaus is a possibility, yes. Okay. And in Lingua also, of course.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Well, Ali, thank you very much for coming in. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a pleasure as well, Scott.
An idiom a day keeps the doctor away. Let's talk idioms.
Hi, Scott.
Hey, John.
So here we are for the idiom part of our podcast.
Fantastic. Do you have one that you want to talk about?
Oh, yes, I do.
And what idiom would that be?
It's the elephant in the room.
Ah, one of my favorites.
Oh, really?
So, John, tell us, or how do you use the elephant in the room idiom?
The elephant in the room is usually something that a subject or a topic that we aren't talking about, even though it's pretty obvious.
Okay.
So,
Sounds interesting.
yeah.
Do you have an example for us today?
Yeah, actually, I've used it a couple of times in the last 2 weeks. And one example was, it's a little bit personal, but I was talking with a friend of mine and he was telling me about his problems keeping fit and his weight and going to the gym and problems with breathing. And we'll sort of talking about that a little bit, but I felt like he was missing the elephant in the room.
Which would be?
He's smoking. He's a heavy smoker.
Okay.
So in this case, and I said to him, hey, let's call him Joe. Joe, don't you think you're missing the elephant in the room? He said, what's that? And I said, you're smoking.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay. And what did he say?
Well, he didn't like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And John, where do you think this comes from? What are the origins of the elephant in the room?
Well, actually, I had to look it up because I didn't know, but it came from Russia.
Okay.
From a fabulist. You know what a fabulist is, Scott?
I don't know what a fabulist is.
It's not somebody that's very good at being fabulous or somebody that's against people that are being fabulous, which you might assume. But actually, Ivan Krylov, a Russian fabulist, used it in a story called The Inquisitive Man, where a guy went to a museum and told his friend about it, about all the lovely things in the museum, all the little things, but he didn't tell him about the elephant that was in the room.
So there actually was an elephant in the room.
In this case, yes. And then a couple of 100 years later, we started to see the use of this in the US and throughout England, and I guess it developed.
Okay, so it's something obvious that no one wants to talk about.
That's right.
Perfect.